There was this quote I put up on Instagram a couple days ago from Robert Greene, and it said, "If a sword is always sheathed, it will become rusty. The blade will dull, and people will think as much of its owner." And I said,
Hmm.
behavior holds much more credibility than just fiery words, right? And I said, become a weapon capable of great and mighty things and demonstrate it often. So you got to push through. I mean, otherwise you're old and rusty and you're weak. And so obviously that's not a call to violence, but as Jordan Peterson would say, like, be capable of violence. Otherwise, being weak is no virtue. I'm curious your take then. So, I mean, it's a good analogy using the war analogy. So the energy has shifted. We have to kind of push forward. So then what's the challenge for everybody listening here? Like, if we want to have that world where accountability is back and justice is served and maybe a more freer world that's based off of beauty and meritocracy. I mean, what's the charge? What's the call to action? What are people going to do about that?
I can't answer that for individual people. All I can do is say it in such a way. It's like, find that which fires you up and find that with which you can contribute. And again, I used to be this raging libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, all this kind of crap, and I've thrown that out the window fundamentally. I think it's all bullshit. Politics will always exist, and there's that saying which I found out Trotsky actually stole it. The one where it's like, you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. That actually goes back to Pericles. Trotsky stole it and pretended it was his. Typical communist, right? But if you're interested in politics, and as you kind of said earlier, if you're not able to play at the higher level, play at the local level. There is much, 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 much help needed at the local level to gain back control and power in the areas that matter, because the local is going to affect you more than the state or the federal, right? So get into that. Get into business.
Yeah.
Lead your peer group, your friends group, like build a men's circle. Like if you're a man, if you're a woman, build a women's circle and start to like reestablish rituals and rites of passage and all this sort of stuff. Like that's the stuff that matters. And for the love of God, like get off. If all you're gonna do on social media is like just comment, like get off it.
Yeah.
Like stop being a consumer and start being a producer. Like so the same principles apply, I guess, across all of these things.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson recently was in Los Angeles. I was able to take my daughter up there and see him. It was really, really good, as he is always. And he's been talking about for like the last year at least, like the story of Exodus. And how he says that the story of Exodus is really the story of life, everybody's life. But for what I'm talking about specifically, he talked about how the Israelites lived in Egypt under tyranny, the tyranny of the Pharaoh, and they were slaves. And you think of tyranny and slaves as sort of the same thing, but they're different because the slave mentality is such that you can't think for yourself. You're always just told what to do. And so because of that, you're not able to think for yourself, then you can never take any agency. And so when the Israelites were freed and they moved over into first the desert, they fought, they bickered, they didn't know what to do. And they had to come up with a new form of government, this hierarchical form of government that was broken into smaller groups, and they went into like a bigger group. And he talked about how anarchy is not the opposite of tyranny, because you always are going to need that governance structure. But the only way it can work, if it's not tyranny, is that each person has to have personal responsibility for themselves. Because the slave doesn't. The slave is like, I have no responsibility, just tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. And so the only way we can have that constitutional republic or whatever type of free, individualistic, but yet still a system of governance, and is if everybody were to step up and take that personal responsibility. And then he goes on to say that if we don't, we're too busy, then a tyrant will take it every single time.
Well, there's actually a really important point here. So it reminds me of an article I wrote called Responsibility Go Up Technology a little while ago. And I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. And what I said in there is, if you want to take away someone's freedoms, you start by taking away their responsibilities.
Right, which is back to the demoralization we talked about earlier, maybe.
Well, it is related, right? So, like, the more, I guess, responsibilities you move from someone, the less meaning they have in life, and I guess lack of meaning lack of, you become demoralized. But this is a really important point, is that you don't, like, taking away someone's freedom overtly initiates a pushback. But if you slowly take away people's responsibility, take away their responsibility for education, take away their responsibility for their health, take away their responsibility for all this sort of stuff, you slowly strip away responsibility. What you'll discover really quickly is that now you don't have freedom over those things. You are a dependent, which is another word for slave. Dependency is on the pathway to slavery. So responsibility, I talk about this in the book as well, is freedom is a value. Freedom is something you want and something you want to feel, but it's not a virtue. The difference between a value and a virtue is an act. So a virtue is, like I said earlier, it's a mixture of a behavior and a principle, right? So it's a principled act. Responsibility is the virtue that gives rise to freedom, the value. And it's not the other way around. And this is where, again, libertarians, their entire mental model is around freedom, and they maybe talk about responsibility 2% of the time.
Right.
Like the equation needs to be the other way around. It needs to be 80% of a discussion around responsibility, 20% of a discussion around the feeling of freedom, because that's the end that we want to experience, but you don't get it without the payment of responsibility up front.
Yeah.